All right, there we go. I never know when to end that video. It goes, it should, but welcome to the show, everyone. It's the Lazy Lab podcast. This is episode number, I'm losing track, I think 8. And I'm joined today by Jess Agnew, who is a Naval Academy graduate. She went to school with our good buddy, El Presidente, Matt Mitchelson, and was also a surface warfare officer, but now spends her time doing professional coaching. Has been in the learning and development space in corporate America for the last 4 years. So welcome to the show, Jess. Of course, I want to real quick give a shout out to Ubora Coffee Roasters, who's providing the caffeine for our hunts and the caffeine for our day-to-day here. So shout out to them. You can see it down there in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And also apologies if that intro video is just like blaring loud for anyone else. I hear it in my headphones. I'm like, oh my gosh, my ears. But welcome to the show, Jess. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So, open dialogue on this. I know that we had exchanged some emails. Hey, what's the format for this show? And the format is there is no format. So it's format. No, it's for everyone else. We're just gonna have a dialogue about your experience and what you're doing now. And I'm excited about this. As most viewers know, I had a little podcast that I ran for 100 episodes called Vet Pivot, and it's no longer around, but it basically was about transition from the military into the civilian world, which is a very daunting time in a lot of people's lives, because you are redefining yourself. I say it specifically that way because, and I'm sure you see this, people a lot of times will define themselves by their service, and what rank they have and what job they did in the military. And it's like, okay, but that's not who you are. That's what you did, And so that's probably the first question that people should seek to answer when they're getting out is, who do I want to be? Who am I? And what's important to me, and start to write down that list. Now, I don't know what you do from a coaching perspective, so maybe you could walk through that.
Absolutely. Well, and I can start off too, if it's helpful, and talk about how I found my way to coaching, because it's very much what you were just talking about. So I transitioned out several years ago, and my husband was also active duty military, and he got accepted to a great advanced degree program. He got his JD MBA. And so we had a conversation, like, should I stay in and he get out? And we're going through all the things. And we decided that it would be best if we both just got out and kind of started fresh. But what that ended up meaning was that I just had no idea what I was doing, because I hadn't planned to get out at that time. I was actually planning to do a lateral transfer at the time. And so, so I got out, and my husband and I kind of joke about it now, but we call it my dark year, because it was just this like 1 year period of time where I just felt super lost. And I was really fortunate to have a pretty decent support network. But even with that support network, I found that I bounced around from idea to idea, and it was almost like a feeling of overwhelm because there were too many options, and I think one thing that I'm very aware of now, but at the time it just seemed like not a problem. You go from having, 3 locations, 3 jobs, like a very defined, clear slate, and you kind of know how each of those jobs will impact your career trajectory. And then you get out, and unless you're going into some sort of formal educational program or something like that, pretty much the opportunities are endless. You could do anything from coffee barista to like tech program manager
Yeah.
to like, name it. And I didn't think about how overwhelming that would be, I don't know if
Oh,
you had
it's
sort of a similar.
I was very fortunate. I felt like really focused on what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Um, but in my experience and talking to people that are getting out and kind of providing some mentorship is it is so terrifying, the ambiguity around what you could do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you take folks who are very much used to, this is your job and you will do this and here's your SOP and here, we're
Yeah.
so used to lists and being put in a box and saying this is what your job is and this is how you contribute to the mission. That very first part is like defining the mission. Well,
Yeah.
you're not part of this like mission that you've been a part of for forever, for however long you were in. You're now part of like the mission of you and your family, and that would be like mission number one, and mission number two would be this organization, whichever one you choose, right? And mission number three would be the community that you serve, but they're all different and they're kind of siloed in that sense. And it can be hard to figure out, how do I go forward? Like,
Yeah.
how do I figure out where I fit in the mission? And that is where people get really super overwhelmed. It's like, I have
Yeah.
no
Bogged
idea.
down. Yeah, totally. And that's actually one of the things I love most about my job now. So the type of coaching that I do, I'm coactively trained, which is like a certain type of model, but I also do something called Designing Your Life. This is basically a program that was sort of born from the Stanford Design School.
Okay.
And they took the design thinking methodology, which is literally like what designers use when they're designing a new product. And these two Stanford professors were like, what if we just applied this to life design for undergrads that are trying to answer this question of what do I be when I grow up, So they started off with this just one class and it caught fire, and they were like, this is great. People love this. Maybe we'll expand it to, graduate students, and maybe we'll write a book. And it's sort of morphed into this whole movement basically. And so that is a lot of, I'm certified to coach in this way. And so this is where I draw a lot of my tools and things like that from. And it helps answer that question. Like, I've just transitioned out of the military. There's all these options. How do I figure out where to start? Because that's oftentimes the hardest part. And so the process that I like to go through when I'm working with transitioning vets is get really clear on your values. Get really clear on what, at the end of the day, very basic, what do you want your life to be about overall? Very basic, very simplified down. And then you take that and you start testing stuff out. And in the design thinking methodology, they call it prototyping. And so what prototyping looks like in life design is sort of two different things you can do. You can either try stuff out or talk to people and figure out what it's like when they've tried stuff out. And so that's what we like to say when we talk about prototyping in your life design. And it's funny because I found this book. I basically stumbled upon this book, and I did so after I had already transitioned into my corporate learning and development role. And I was like, man, if I had had this book when I was transitioning, maybe it wouldn't have been my dark year. Maybe it would have been like the best year ever. So
what's the book? Are you allowed to say?
Designing Your Life. That's what it's called.
Oh, I'm sorry. You already said Designing Your Life. I thought it was another book.
No, that's the title of the book.
I'm taking notes here, and it's like,
they also recently wrote another book, which I've found really valuable. So the first book is sort of, it feels very much about like when you're pivoting, how to do job changes or pivot into a new sector or something like that. The second book they wrote was really focused on, okay, that's not always a reasonable course of action. So how do you get the most out of where you're at to prepare you for like the next chapter, whatever that looks like? And so I really like the two together, especially during, things with COVID. People who may have been planning a career pivot maybe didn't feel comfortable this year. So it's been a real joy to sort of go through that arc and have deep empathy for what people are going through and be able to truly help them sort of navigate their way now. Has been really awesome.
That's one of the things that I think is easiest to relate to, right? Is like, we've all been there, when I talk to veterans, like, look, what you're going through right now, there are a ton of us that have been there before.
Yeah.
So like, just talk to people. I feel like it's so important to have a mentor
Yeah.
or several mentors in your personal pivot from the military. Is like, you should have people, when you talk about prototyping, I love it put in that sense, because, my buddy Herb Thompson wrote a book called Mission Transition. It's like a real small little, I don't know, hour read. You could pick it
Cool.
up at the airport and then read it, by the time you land at your destination. Um, but the premise of it is like, he did like 1,000 interviews,
Yeah.
not like for jobs, but like informational interviews. He's talking to as many people as he can to kind of get to fast track that prototyping process.
Yeah.
Because if you try it out, this is where it gets dangerous, right? I think, and I could be wrong here, but the way I was taught anyways, and what I've viewed is, if you're trying stuff out, you're putting that on your resume as something that you've done.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to jump from thing to thing to thing, because it looks to an employer like, why
Yeah.
are you bouncing
Yeah.
around so much? You know what I mean?
Such
So
a good point.
those informational interviews become really important, right? It's like, okay, well, I can at least get a feel for it,
Yep.
through some
Yeah.
good conversations.
Well, and one of the things I like to share with people too is trying stuff out. It doesn't have to be this huge commitment, right? Like if
Right.
let's say you're trying to pivot into any industry, right? Like we'll just say project management, because you mentioned that
Right.
previously when we were chatting. So let's say you want to pivot into project management, and I mean, pretty much everybody's done, like, big secret, pretty much everybody's done project management in the military. We just like call it different stuff. But let's say you want to pivot into that sector and you don't know much about it. You can just start calling people, and it's amazing how many people, if you just cold call them, want to help you because you're a veteran.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I could count on one hand the number of times that people have said, no, I don't have time for you. And it wasn't like I don't want to talk to you. It was like I truly don't have time right now, but let me know if you want to connect in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people get hung up on even asking for help is hard. So if you want to try stuff out, like, call somebody that's in project management up and say, hey, can I shadow you for a day? Can I hop in on a couple of your, if they're doing agile or something, can I hop in on one of your calls, or can I hop in on a scrum call and see what it's like? And you don't have to like change jobs or sign up for a course. You can just literally absorb it and get a feel for if that's something that you like. It's really that simple, but I think it just feels so daunting at the time. But that's what
100%.
I work with my clients on.
So you give them the guts, right? You give them the guts to go and like, hey, here's the thing. Like, you don't need to jump ship just yet. You can kind of dip your toe in the water and still keep doing the thing that you're doing.
Or like, gather intel, that's all you're doing at the end of the day. You're gathering
you're doing
intelligence
recon
on where you're going.
You're doing some recon. Let me go do some recon on this. Like, I 100% agree. And the last thing that you want to do is string together a bunch of decisions on direction with zero information other than, I just don't really care for what I'm doing right now. It's like, I even, and this is like disclosure, right? The full disclosure to the audience, like, my first job in the company I work for, which I'll keep a secret. Okay. But the company I work for,
maybe they'll stalk you on LinkedIn later and find out.
My first job did not go the way I thought it was going to go. It wasn't a fit like I thought it felt like it was going to be a fit. And so I did some more research internally. I talked to folks. I built my network within the organization because I still like the company I work for. And when I was approaching my 1 year mark in the first role, I started to just ping my network. Hey, do you know of any opportunities that, you think would be a good fit for someone with my skill set? And it was just asking peers and people I've worked with on projects in the past, like, hey, you know me pretty well. We've worked together over the last year. Do you think that I could fit somewhere in the organization that's doing something cool. And it just
Yeah.
led to an opportunity, and I applied and I got that new role. So, I didn't, the key point being is I didn't quit
Yep.
what wasn't a fit. I kept doing it, and I did it, to the best of my ability. And then I found something that's been a much better fit. But you have to network, and you have to like build that reputation of, this is a cool, like, this is a good person to work with.
Yep.
If you're a jerk, no one's going to help you out
Exactly.
in that department, right? You have to actually just continue to carry those values you picked up while wearing the uniform into the civilian side. But it's not you're not picking, to go back to what we were talking about to start, is you're not picking your next career for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? You're picking a direction for the next 1 to 5 years. And if it works out, maybe it does become a career, but statistically you'll probably switch some point in the first 2 years, 2 to 3 years.
Well, and they're saying
okay.
now people, by the time they retire, they've done an average of 3 to 4 different careers completely. By retirement age, it's not the same as it used to be, where you just like get on the on-ramp and kind of work your way up the chain.
Right.
It's different entirely. And I actually had a very, very similar situation, just to sort of add credence to what we were talking about. When I'll tell everybody where I worked. It's fine. I worked at HP. And when I started, I had a role that I thought was going to be like the holy grail of roles for me. Right. And it's like everything else in life. There were goods and bads, and, overall though, it was positive, but, it wasn't something that I wanted to do forever. And I had connected with this woman my first week at HP, and it was just a random, like, get to know you call, because she worked sort of in a part of the organization that we worked cross-functionally with sometimes. Right. And I was just like, I asked her questions about her and what she did and learned, but I was also very open about who I was and my values. And I showed up, very genuine to who I was. And 2 years later, they completely restructured my organization, laid off a pretty large percentage of my organization. The role that I had been in was completely gotten rid of. They literally fired most of them, got rid of the role entirely. And because of that first conversation that I had with that woman, she actually ended up creating a role for me, and I didn't get laid off. And it was more of a dream job for me than anything else, because she had designed the role thinking about the conversation that we had 2 years prior, and was like, how would you like to come in and work and lead I got to lead a team effectiveness program from scratch, literally design it soup to nuts, in partnership with some amazing minds. And it was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was incredible. And it was all because of a conversation that I had randomly like 2 years prior. And I chose to just be totally open and share my values and what I was about. So I like to think, people get really hung up on this concept of networking, but at the end of the day, it's just relationship building, right? You're just making relationships.
You're making friends, that's
Yeah,
it. You're making friends. You're making friends with people. And you never know. Like I always call it like you're planting seeds, right? And that's not like that's not a new analogy, but that's the one that I always go back to. You never know which seed is going to bear fruit one day, and that's the thing. So you have to go and talk to folks and be, a little bit extroverted sometimes, and that's okay. To the 90% of introverts that are out there. Sometimes you just have to. You got it, and it's okay to do that, because it's not disingenuous. I feel like I used that word already. But it's not a bad thing, right? People feel like, well, it's kind of fake because I'm doing it for my own self-gain. You're not doing it for your own self-gain. You're making friends, and one day those friends may help you out. Like that's called business. So
and I found most things in life, I feel like, really pay off if I just approach it from a position of curiosity. I'm not actually trying to get anything other than cool information out of this conversation. What what are you doing? How do you like it? What's it about? It's just information that you're gathering, and you never know where that'll go. And actually, I've had, in terms of like conversations bearing fruit, I've had just as many of those conversations turn around to opportunities where I could help them as the
Right.
other way around. So it's I don't know. I've really been sort of reframing how I've been thinking about networking lately, and it's been very, very helpful.
We
And
should go to,
going
we
back
should
to,
explore that some, because I feel like
yeah.
networking is a huge topic, right?
Mhm.
Obviously, it's something that as veterans, no, it's not part of like the basic training handbook. Like, hey,
No.
when you get to your first duty station, like you should create a LinkedIn account and start to, build your relationships. They don't tell you that, although probably would be a good
Yeah.
idea, because if we go back to like the very beginning of this conversation, which I said, like, if you're a transitioning veteran right now, talk to someone who's done it before. There's like 18 million of us. So,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah,
um,
exactly.
I just, it would make sense to like do LinkedIn while in, um, would
I feel like
really
it's
pay
becoming more and
dividends.
more prevalent too. I think everybody was, you have to worry about OPSEC and stuff like that. But I feel
Sure.
like now it's becoming commonplace enough to where there's a way to go about it. You just have to make sure that you clear whatever you put in your command. But I agree, LinkedIn's such a powerful tool, and it's interesting how many veterans I see that are transitioning that have never even opened an account, or if they do, it's like very bare bones. I was the same way.
Yeah.
But man, it's a really useful tool. And going back to what I was talking about with cold calling people, it's so easy to sort of follow the bouncing ball in LinkedIn. Like, I was talking to somebody the other day. They're getting ready to transition out. They're probably 3-4 months out. And they were talking about what they, I feel like this is common, but what they felt like they should enter into based off of their role, which is sort of supply chain logistics, right?
Right.
And they were, very like, okay, I could get a government role. I could do this. I could do this. I could do this. And I was like, well, why don't you go on LinkedIn and find 10 people who had a military background similar to yours, and just see what type of jobs they've had and talk to them about it. And, if somebody's done one random interesting thing, follow that line down the road, and
Yeah.
see if they'll connect you with people at the company. You don't have to just go into this with blinders and say, government roles are great if that's what you're into, but there's just so many more options. And there are ways for you to not be totally overwhelmed by the number of options, but rather think of it as sort of, I like to think of it as wayfinding. You know what I mean? Like, you're just going to
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
waypoint and exploring it there and seeing if that's the direction you want to go in. And if you're not so sure about that direction, then you kind of pivot and go to the next waypoint and kind of explore there. Doesn't have to be a
It's real.
super.
It's so hard for people. I would never knock like the government route, like the GS
Oh,
employee
it's
route.
great.
I know so many people that went and did it. Um, and good for them, right? If that's
Yeah.
if that's what you wanted to do, good for you. Like, if you wanted to continue to serve but just not wear the uniform, kudos, right?
Yep.
That's not me. Like, that was not that person. And to that point, like, there are a lot of things out there. You can use LinkedIn to find those connections. I always like encourage people to reach out to those second connections, because I feel like
Yes.
that unearths a whole new group of people that you would not have had access to.
Yep.
But it's like, hey, you and Tommy both know Jim. Go talk to Jim, and be like,
Yep.
hey, I know Tommy, Tommy. Like, and some people just blow you off, and they'll never respond. But that's why it's cold calling, right? The
Yeah.
point of it is you're doing a little bit of that recon to see what other people have done. You're trying to gain some intelligence on what is out there that people have done that have a similar background to me. Understanding that like more than half of veterans will end up doing something that has nothing to do with what they did in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So it seems like a weird place to start. Like,
Well, and I think with networking, people get, at least in my experience, people I've talked to, they get nervous about how they'll come across when they cold
yeah,
call people. And so I think, at the end of the day, you just have to be respectful of people's time, right? You're either going to have people blow you off, and if that's the case, honestly, it probably would have been a waste of your time to have that conversation, even if they'd taken it,
100%.
because they wouldn't try to help you. They would just placate you, right?
Yep.
You want the person that responds and is like, yes, absolutely. Who can I connect you with? What can I do? But when you get a call like that, what people tend to forget is you have to respect their time, because they are likely very busy. They're taking time out
Mm-hmm.
of their day. So they want to help you. You need to sort of lay that foundation. So what I like to tell people is you don't have to come with like I need a job, will you give me a job? But at least come with some questions that are specific to the person that you're talking to, right?
Yeah.
Don't just have your live generic questions like, oh, what was the transition like for you? Oh, how do you feel the civilian workplace feels about veterans? Like, you don't want to make them general, but do a little sleuthing. This person works at X company, read about X company. What sort of things is that company going through
Yeah.
from a business perspective, and talk about that. What about the company culture? Like, go through the website. What do you find interesting? Ask about benefits. Like, I feel people forget about, like, they're so overwhelmed by, because we don't have to deal with benefits when we're in the
We don't have to
military.
deal with
There's
that
like,
stuff
go
when
to
you're in the.
medical.
You're right. I
But when
know.
you're having an informational interview, that's fair game. You can absolutely talk about that. So
You should talk about that. That's the other
yes.
thing. Is like, you should. That is territory. I almost like try to encourage folks, go talk to someone who's never been in the military and ask
Yeah.
them what questions they would bring into an informational
Yep.
interview. Because now that puts you on level playing field with whoever you're going to be interviewing against. It's not like
Absolutely.
you're interviewing for roles against people that were also veterans. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Hey, Joe Civilian, go talk to your neighbor. I don't know. I talk to my neighbor sometimes. Like, hey,
Yeah.
his name's John Mark. Hey, John Mark, what, if I were to like interview for this job, like if I wanted to get some information about it, what kind of questions do you ask in an informational interview to an employer, potential employer?
Mm-hmm.
And then just you get like a whole new lens on what is fair game to ask, and some of it may
Yep.
be good, some of it may not, but you're going to get some stuff that you would not have thought of and you wouldn't have gotten from veterans.
Absolutely. And speaking of getting help from non-veterans, I think it's also very helpful with resumes.
Yes.
When we're writing our resumes, even when we think we've removed every military term or every acronym, they sneak in there. They're such a central part of our language when we're transitioning out. So I recommend find a couple of civilians in a couple of different industries and make sure they know what the things on your resume mean.
Yeah. Have them
Because
sanity check
if
it.
they don't, yeah, it gets filtered out so hard. And people, I hate to say it, but confirmation bias is very real. And it's not from a place of malice. It's just from a place of people
Right.
don't want to feel stupid. And so if they're
Right.
reading a resume and they don't know what it means, they're going to feel stupid. And so they probably won't keep reading,
Yeah, they'll quit
so
on you.
yeah. So, it's not that they don't want to help you. It's just oftentimes it's hard work for them to figure it out.
Yep.
So and I even had, so when I was transitioning out, man, I had so many civilians, random people that I just like bumped into and knew from a couple of conversations. And I was like, can you just read through my resume and tell me if it's weird? And I think by the time I applied to HP, I think I was on version 20 something of like completely
Oh, I'm
rewriting my
sure.
resume.
Yeah.
It was so bad the first time.
If I went into my
yeah.
computer, I have a folder called resumes. And I mean, gosh, it's got to be full of like hundreds. Like, cause
Oh yeah.
I would have like, you tailor them. So I used to do this. I have a poker hand, concept that I use for like when I'm looking for a job. So I have like five is the max that I play 5 card poker as the max number of jobs, requisitions that I'm going to be focusing on. So basically one from each company, 5 different companies, and I'm tailoring just those 5. I'm focusing on research for just those 5 companies. I'm mock interviewing for those 5 companies. And if one company takes their hat out of the ring, says they're not interested, well, now I can go, they go in the discard pile and I get a new rec, and that's, I kind of play that way. But even with that, it's like, okay, but I still am tailoring that resume. So when I was on my initial job hunt, I mean, they just pile up, they just pile up
Yeah, they
because you're
really
going to
do.
get no's, right? You get a lot of rejection as part of the
Mhm.
transition process. And my mentor at the time, shout out to Heather, had told me, she'd be like, I'd be like, Heather, I got rejected again. I felt like I was perfect for
Aw.
this role. And she would be like, Matt, that's okay. That's
Yep.
okay. It's just not the right one. That's just not the right one. The right one will come along. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. You just you get antsy. I want to I got to find a job, my family, my future. You start thinking about all these things, and
Yeah.
patience plays a big part in that, right?
Yep. Yeah, it really does. Well, and what's interesting now that you bring that up and that sort of the interview process, right? Rejection. I have a favorite rejection story, if it's fair game to share that right now.
Oh yeah, let's hear it. I love a good rejection story.
So, so when I first started interviewing with tech companies, I had no idea how to talk about myself, right? Like they drill it into you when you're in the military. It's not about you. It's about the collective. It's about the collective.
Right.
But which does not work in an interview situation. And so I was interviewing for this job, which now that I've been in the industry, I realize like at first I was like, oh, this is probably a low level job, but I don't really know where to on ramp. So I guess this is a good first role. And now that I'm in the industry, I'm like, whoa, that was like way, way too low for the experience that I brought to the table. And even still, going through that interview process, I felt like I was nailing it. Like I felt like I was just really hitting it out of the park. And it ended, and she was like, thanks so much for your time and thank you for your service. And I was like, oh, thank you for your support, and I left, did not get the job. Got a call like the next day and they were like, thank you so much, we're going to go in a different direction. And I was totally flabbergasted. I was like, I
Yeah.
felt like I nailed this interview. So I ended up calling the recruiter, and I was like, I just really would like some feedback. I really thought, I thought I had it in the bag and I clearly didn't. I'm new to this, would you mind giving me some feedback and maybe talking to the hiring manager that I had been interviewing with and just let me know how I can improve. And so he did, and he was wonderful. And he came back and he was like, so they didn't feel like you had enough experience managing and evaluating employees, and they didn't feel like you could appropriately evaluate employee performance. And I was like, so basically all I did in the military, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's nuts, and I was so mad at the time. I was so mad. And I was like, this is BS. I don't even know how this happened. And then I really sat down and started reflecting on it. And I was like, I did not talk about myself a single time in that interview. All I talked about was the Navy. And I started really thinking about the questions she asked. And they were all like, well, how does the Navy do this? How does the Navy do this? What's the Navy's stance on this? And I just rolled with it, right?
Yeah.
But I did not talk about me, Jess, a single time. And that
Right.
was a huge turning point for me, because then I started really thinking about, okay, how do I want to show up for these interviews? It's important that they know me and we explore if I am a good fit for this role, not a Navy veteran. Am I a good fit for this role? And are
Right.
they a good fit for me? So that was a huge turning point for me. And I feel like vets get sucked into that trap so hard, because it's so easy to talk about the
Yeah.
collective.
Well, the time to talk about the collective is when you're talking about, oh shoot, I just had it in my head. Industry experience, right? So you talk about,
Yes.
sorry, I had it in my head and just like disappeared. The time to talk about the collective is when they want to know how industries compare. And then
Yep.
you can talk about, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, whatever. Like you can talk about that stuff then. When they're
Yep.
asking about like specific skills and requirements for the role, like that's when you like, well, this is what I did for the Navy. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
you can start to talk about like your accolades, talk about what you bring to the table, talk about a time that you solved a problem that's similar to a problem that they have. Ask a follow if you need time, ask like
Yeah.
a clarifying question.
Yep.
But I'll give you this. You called and asked for feedback, which I think is such an important thing to do. And I
It
think it's
is. Yeah.
something that people just like take the rejection and like, okay, fine. And they like
Yeah.
walk away. You're like, no, not fine. Like get the
Yeah.
feedback, like understand, like otherwise you're just going to repeat mistakes that you
Same
made in
time.
that interview in your next interview, and you're
Yep.
going to perpetuate this cycle. You don't want to do that.
Yep.
No, that's awesome. Feedback. I love a good rejection story because
Yeah.
they're
They're so good.
well, you just learn from them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's so many tidbits, but I got I gotta say, like, when you do get that feedback, you really realize it helps you place yourself. And that's kind of the direction I want to go
Yeah.
with the conversation, because I think it's important, and you can really help with
Agree.
this with what you do. You get an idea of where you belong
Yep.
and what type of roles you should be applying to. And
Yeah.
that's the feedback that helped me out the most was um, two separate jobs that I applied to. The one, the recruiter was like, well, what are you asking for in salary? Oh, smokes. I don't know how to answer that question. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Good
I threw a
one.
number out there.
A good
Yeah.
salary.
High. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's a lot? What's a lot? He's like, you don't know how to answer that question. I want the a lot salary.
Yeah.
You don't know. You gotta do your research. So
Yeah.
I did my research, but when you're doing that, you kind of have to know what level you're at and what type of role you should be applying to get a solid number. So the one I had said my number, and they're like, whoa, like, just, I'm going to tell you this because I feel like you should know. And I know that you're transitioning out of the military. And this recruiter said, but you really should be more in this range. And it was
Yep.
significantly higher than what I was asking
Yeah.
for.
Yep.
And I was like, really? Like, really? Like,
Dang it.
are you sure? Like
Yeah.
anybody watching that conversation from the outside be like, hey, dummy, like, just go with it. Like, why are you trying to downsell? So there was that one, and then I had another one where they're like, hey, look, you're overqualified for this role that you're applying for, and you should really be more like around here. And shout out to Comcast and their head of military and veteran affairs for pointing me in the right direction and taking care of me there, because they called me for like a late round interview for that one, and
Yeah.
would have given me the job if I was less qualified. So
Yeah.
it's stuff like that where you're like, okay, all right. So it kind of helps frame where you should be. How do you talk to vets though about where they should be looking and how they figure out if they're mid-level, if they're senior, if they're
Yep.
kind of in between? Like, how do you know where to go into an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a good question. And I will say, I think it to a large extent is a little bit industry and role specific, right? So there are some roles that I feel are just directly transferable. You can go like years experience for years experience, and then some, because you have so much more leadership experience that you bring to the table. But then I think it depends on if you get really narrow in terms of what type of industry that you're trying to enter into. Because if you get into, like we were talking about, like blockchain earlier, right? Or something like that.
Right.
That's an area where in your negotiation process, as you're interviewing, you can sort of flesh that out a little bit. And you can do one of two things. You can either know that you're on ramping at a slightly, not huge, slightly lower level than would directly transfer to your military experience, with the knowledge that you're doing that so you can gain domain expertise, right? And when
Right.
veterans do that, what I tend to see is they'll enter in at a lower point, but once their career starts to uptick, it upticks rapidly.
Yeah.
And so that's one course you could do. Another, and I think this is sort of company specific, so you'll find this out in your informational interviews. Some companies sort of negotiate that into the package. Like I know one
Yeah.
person who entered into a totally new area. It's like a niche area of finance, right? And so they hired him, and they were like, okay, so we are going to hire you at this senior level with the understanding of this first year, you're going to be busting your butt because you're going to be on ramping and you're going to be getting that domain expertise. So we'll go ahead and put you at this level, but this first year is going to be a grind. So we all need to know this. And then they offered a pretty extensive bonus at the end of that.
Yeah.
If you met all of the benchmarks, right? So there's a couple of different ways that you can go about it, but I think it's important to find a balance between, yes, I have a ton of leadership experience, and remembering I might not have quite as much domain expertise. The one thing I've learned in a corporate environment, so this is probably more specific to the tech industry, if you're looking at what sort of educational development costs a company, right? It costs them significantly more to develop a leader than it does to develop a specific skill. It's just financially more expensive for them. So remember that, because yes, you might need to go and get some certification in some random skill or something like that.
Sure.
But what they're not going to have to do is teach you how to lead. And that is that's like a really good investment for them. So
it's a really big expense for companies too, right?
Huge
And retaining employees is another piece of it. And if you're a good leader, if you're a good manager of people, you'll do a better job of retaining top talent, which is where a lot of companies throw money, good after bad, and trying to retain their top talent there. And we talked about it earlier in the show, right? Is people are going to have 3 or 4 careers. People jump ship. I mean, even right now, people are taking advantage of the plethora of open requisitions that are out there to move up and jump ship and get themselves better salaries, better, benefit packages, a better title. There's a lot of posturing going on at the moment. And if you're able to retain talent for an organization, they should be willing to compensate that.
Totally. Well, and what I'd like to tell people is, sort of going back to that domain expertise area, if you are interviewing for a job and you're, trying to jump up a couple of levels, or if you're doing your first transition out or something like that, don't assume that you're not eligible for a job. Just tell them how you're going to on-ramp,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Have a plan. Go into it and say, hey, like, I have all of these skills over here. I know that this is a weak area of mine compared to everything else. So this is how I'm going to address it once you hire me. And go in with a plan, because that tells them that you're not just going to sit back and be like, okay, thanks for the job. You're going to really go after it, and you're going to provide them value, and you're smart and you can think about how to problem solve. It actually tells them a lot about your values. And I think most veterans go into these sorts of things with the willingness to develop those skills, but it seems to not occur to people to talk about that in an interview. That's
a good point. That's a really good point. Like, you should be willing to show them that if you're going to show them how to problem solve problems that they're currently having, you should also show them how to problem solve problems they could have by hiring you, right? And it's a scary place to talk. It's a scary place to go into, because you're kind of pointing at a weakness, but you're showing a willingness to address weakness with solutions, right? And that's at the end of the day, that's a really strong testament to your leadership skills. Now, don't go in there and be like, well, I suck at this. So that's going to be, that might be a problem for all of us, but you don't want to, maybe not the right approach, but be like, look, I understand that coming out of the military, it's not a direct translation in industry skills. And so my awareness or understanding of financial regulations may not be the same as someone who's been in banking for 20 years, but I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that I learn that side of the house.
Exactly. Well, and something that, and I don't know that this would work for no, I think it would, actually. I think it's pretty transferable. So you are inherently good at that in the military, because you change jobs every 18 months to 2 years. So use that in the interview process. Talk about how that's a strength of yours. Like, in the military, you have to have the ability to show up at a new command with 0 turnover, sometimes a dumpster fire, and on ramp in a matter of hours sometimes, and
that's
be able to
point.
Take it and run with it. And that is a transferable skill to filling in those gaps of domain expertise, right?
That's a great point. I'm thinking back to like my interviews and using something similar to that, being, and add in the fact, like, I've had to do that in austere environments where I don't have a lot of resources to get that done. And so I'm capable of not only adapting, but adapting with minimal resources at my disposal. So,
and flooded with cortisol, right? Like, if people get so stressed in the civilian world, about things that just really aren't that stressful. You know what I mean? Like nobody's shooting at you. You're fine.
Yeah, cool. It's all good.
And so, I mean, maybe don't talk about being shot at in an interview because that's kind of, people get freaked out by that. But you can talk about but you
High
can talk
stress.
high stress. Talk about, I have been honing the skill for the past X number of years to be able to make decisions rapidly, recall information rapidly, and make an informed choice while I am in a highly stressful environment. And that is a transferable skill,
Exactly. Yeah. These are great points. It's so hard for us to like, navigate those conversations because we don't, I'm trying to think of the person that's watching this right now, who's going through this, watching the two of us have this conversation and bring up these points, and their pen's probably not going as fast as their ears are taking in the information. Right. And then on top of that, they're probably like, okay, that's cool. But once I get in the seat and I'm having this conversation and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, I suck at this and I got shot at, and they're saying the things that we told them not to say.
Not to say.
There is going to be a learning curve to this. Like
totally.
Statistically, your odds of getting that very first job you interview for and it being your dream job, I mean, are just so low. You probably have a better odds of playing the Powerball and winning. So just take a deep breath, is what I was like, take a deep breath, relax. That's what I always had to like tell myself. And shout out back to my mentor, Heather. I don't know if you know about the Superman pose.
Yes, I sure do.
she told me about that. She's like, before you go into an interview, just like, like 10 seconds in front of the bathroom mirror, just do the Superman pose. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, are you making fun of me? No. She's like, no, do the Superman pose, 10 seconds from the bathroom mirror, then go into your interview. You're going to feel great. You'll knock it out. And so for the audience, if literally like hands on your side and just do a little Superman pose, take a deep breath and pump yourself up. Give yourself some words of affirmation. I think you're going to be just fine. And know that if that opportunity doesn't work out, it's because it wasn't the right one, not because you're not because you don't have what it takes. It wasn't the right job.
Yep. I also this might be like a little, might ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to say it anyway. I also think we're a little bit failure adverse in the military, right? And it feels horribly uncomfortable. And one of the things that I've recommended to a couple of people who were really particularly struggling with that piece of it, make it a game. Try to get some failures, like purposefully try to get interviews that that you're probably not going to get, and try and knock it out of the park anyway. And when you don't, because you won't, learn from it. Ask for feedback, figure out how you can apply that to the next one. See if you can, in your first month of transition, see if you can get 20 or 30 failures, like rejections. Just
love
straight
it.
up. Desensitize yourself to it,
We are, you're coming from an environment where it's like advance or get out, and your failure is magnified. You're taught from day one, like failure could cost someone their life. You're coming from it, like the failure averse thing resonates and should resonate with every single veteran that hears this, because it's true. Guess what? It's okay. Like on the outside, you're good. Like out of the uniform, it's okay to fail. Don't even worry about it. Don't sweat it unless like you did something dumb. And that's why you failed and it cost you your job. Then it's like, you should probably sweat that and also get rid of that. Get rid of that, whatever that characteristic is. That caused you to make that dumb decision that got you fired. Don't do that anymore. But I think that's a great point. So listen, I want to be mindful of time. I feel like we covered a ton of stuff, and I feel bad for the carpal tunnel that the listener has trying to jot all this stuff down in a notebook. But you could always just watch it again. You could also subscribe so you get updates every time we post a new video, and you can get more of these tips. But I wanted to give you a chance just to promote your business and promote what you do. And also, any parting thoughts that you think it would be good for the audience.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So I'll say One of the things that I love about the particular business that I'm in, it is the least dog eat dog business I think out there. It's actually incredible. I have yet to meet a coach that will not refer a client to another coach because they don't feel like they're the right fit for the client. So what I do is I help people figure out who they are, what they want, and then I help them create a plan for themselves to go get it. Coaching is different. There's sort of like three different industries that are sort of in this arena, I think. And there's therapy, which helps people recover from trauma. Then there's consulting, which gives sort of advice or solutions to a particular issue or problem. And then there's coaching, and coaching is really more helping a person figure out how they can solve their own problems for themselves. It's a very empowering experience. And so that's what I do. So I apply that to the veteran transition. Like I said, I also work with a lot of executives and teams. And so I get that context and I help, kind of weave that into my veteran coaching, which is great intel. And I help people figure out how to navigate this crazy transition beast. And if I'm not the right coach, I really believe in the power of coaching, and I am happy to also make referrals. But I genuinely believe that receiving coaching in a transition is just enormously helpful. So that's a little bit about what I do. But it's just been the most fulfilling career. I really feel like it's such an honor to walk with people as they navigate these big decisions in their lives.
What's the name of your company?
Bridgewing. It's really nerdy. So I named it Bridgewing. I mean, for those of you who aren't Navy, Bridgewing is sort of the position on a ship where you do all the high intensity evolutions, right? Unreps and navigating things like that. And so it's also where I would go when I was super stressed out on deployment and I just needed to get some headspace and I needed to get some perspective, because when you're out there in the middle of the ocean, away from all the lights, and all you see is like water and stars, it's just an incredible experience. And I felt like it was a direct parallel to what I'm hoping to provide people with as they're navigating their careers and transitions, is just an opportunity to have a place to catch their breath and get some perspective. So
Bridgewing Coaching.
Yep.
Bridgewing. Got it. Okay. Yep. Well,
That's me.
Awesome conversation, by the way. So Jess Agnew, Bridgewing Coaching. Thank you so much for the conversation, for the tips. They are amazing tips. And we're going to have to talk to Mitchelson and make sure that you're back on the show in the future. I love these transition talks because it takes me back to my vet pivot days, but it's super important because I feel like there's a lot of value to be gained there for the listener that is going through that. So that said, if you're listening or watching this right now, hopefully watching it on YouTube, that's the best place to go. Hit that subscribe button. The little bell will tell you when we post new videos, and share this with someone that you know who is transitioning out of the military. We all know folks that are doing that or getting ready to do that. So go ahead and share this video with them. There's a lot of really good tips. Big shout out again to Ubora Coffee Roasters, providing the caffeine for our hunts and for everything else that we do. And if you want to donate to Lazy Lab Hunting Club, you can go to lazylabhc.org and throw some dollars their way. 93 cents of every dollar goes directly back into our programs to help veterans who are significantly wounded go on hunting and fishing trips and gain the fellowship through Christ. So thank you so much, everyone. Until the next episode, which will be episode 9, be safe, have fun, and God bless.